In Silicon Valley, a single drop of blood became $1 billion promise. A young CEO in a black turtleneck stood beside powerful men and famous investors. And the name sounded like the future, Theranos. It wasn't just a startup, it was supposed to reinvent medicine. But behind the glossy demos and headlines, what if it didn't work? Theranos was founded in 2003 by Elizabeth Holmes, a Stanford student. She left school to build what she called a revolutionary blood testing company. The pitch was simple and irresistible. Traditional blood tests require vials of blood, trained staff, and complex lab workflows. Theranos claimed it could run hundreds of tests using just a finger prick. Faster and cheaper than anyone else. In medicine, speed and accuracy can mean life or death. So the promise didn't just sound profitable. It sounded like progress. Theranos wasn't only selling to customers. It was selling to investors, media, and regulators. Over the years, the company attracted an unusually high-profile board and backers. People with political influence, military credentials, and global reputations. In a culture obsessed with the next Steve Jobs, Holmes became a symbol. By the mid-2010s, Theranos was valued at around $9 billion in private markets. Then came the retail breakthrough, a partnership with Walgreens. Theranos aimed to place blood testing centers inside stores. To the public, it looked like a medical revolution was already happening. But inside Theranos, the revolution was struggling to pass a basic test. The heart of the story was its machine often associated with the name Edison. Theranos claimed it could take a tiny sample and perform a wide menu of lab tests reliably. But later reporting and testimony described serious limitations. Many tests couldn't be run as advertised. So what happens when your company is built around a promise, and the promise doesn't hold? You hide the gap. According to investigative reporting and later court proceedings, Theranos leaned heavily on secrecy. Employees were compartmentalized. Teams didn't always know what other teams were doing. Problems were kept quiet. Doubts were treated like disloyalty. And when demos were needed, the story still had to look flawless. Over time, accounts alleged the company used commercial lab analyzers for some tests, while presenting results as part of its own revolutionary system. But healthcare isn't like building an app. If results are wrong, people can be misled about serious conditions. This isn't product market fit, it's safety. Inside the company, concerns started to grow. Outside the company, a few voices began searching for the truth. Those concerns would later become central to public reporting and legal scrutiny. But for a while, Theranos kept moving forward, expanding partnerships, refining its image, and doubling down on the narrative. Because by then, the company wasn't just defending a product. It was defending a myth. The moment the illusion started collapsing came through journalism, specifically the Wall Street Journal, with reporting led by John Carreyrou. The articles raised serious questions about accuracy and deception. Was the machine actually doing what Theranos claimed? The pressure didn't stay in the media. Regulatory scrutiny followed. CMS inspected Theranos' lab operations. The fallout was devastating. CMS actions restricted Holmes from owning or operating a lab for a period of time, and Theranos' lab operations faced severe penalties. Then came the legal dominoes. In 2018, the SEC charged Elizabeth Holmes and former President Ramesh Sunny Balwani. The SEC alleged a massive fraud tied to claims about technology, business, and financial performance. The SEC said investors were misled as Theranos raised over $700 million. Holmes settled with the SEC without admitting or denying the allegations. The settlement included penalties and restrictions. But the bigger storm was still forming. That same year, the DOJ indicted Holmes and Balwani on wire fraud-related charges. Theranos, once the startup that promised to rewrite medicine, was now a courtroom story. In 2018, the company announced it would dissolve and distribute remaining cash to creditors. The billion-dollar valuation evaporated, partnerships collapsed, and the public image flipped from visionary to warning label. Was this ambition gone wrong, or deception from the start? The most consequential chapter came with the trials. Holmes went to trial in federal court. In January 2022, a jury found her guilty on multiple counts related to defrauding investors. She was not convicted on some other counts, including certain charges related to patients. In November 2022, Holmes was sentenced to over 11 years in federal prison. Balwani was also convicted and later sentenced to a lengthy prison term. But beyond the courtroom, the damage spread outward. Employees who believed they were building history watched it collapse into scandal. Investors lost vast amounts as the private valuation disintegrated. Business partners faced reputational fallout. And patients, real people, were left in the middle of the story. Because the most disturbing part wasn't the money or the fame. It was the idea that medical decisions could be influenced by unreliable results. Theranos didn't just fail as a business. It shook trust in move-fast culture when applied to healthcare. In medicine, failure isn't a bug. It's a human consequence. The case became a landmark example for regulators, investors, and boards. Charisma is not clinical validation. A powerful board is not a substitute for scientific transparency. And a great story is not proof. Theranos is remembered because it didn't look like a typical fraud. No obvious villains in dark rooms. Just a sleek brand, a compelling mission, and a founder who spoke in certainty. And that's the lesson. Some scandals don't start with greed. They start with pressure to deliver, to prove, to keep the dream alive. But at a certain point, the line gets crossed. After that, every new promise becomes another brick keeping the truth out. Theranos didn't collapse because someone hated the company. It collapsed because reality doesn't care about valuations, headlines, or charisma. So here's the question that still lingers in the era of AI, biotech, and moonshots. If a product can't survive transparency, was it ever innovation at all? If this story helped you see corporate power differently, hit like. Subscribe for more real-world scandals, courtroom fallout, and the business decisions behind them. And comment below, what was the moment in the Theranos story that made you realize it was collapsing? Was it the media investigation, the regulators stepping in, or the trials? And here's the bigger question. How do we protect trust in healthcare when hype moves faster than proof?